Hi everyone, this week we will be talking about both the family and peer development. We will be covering the family structure, family dynamics, and child maltreatment. As a heads up, when we talk about maltreatment, we will be going into some detail about what that means and the different types. And since we are combining chapters this week, we will also be talking about peer development, looking at the importance of play and friendships, as well as status in peer groups. And just so you are aware, we will be dropping the last part of Chapter 12 on the family socioeconomic context to make room for this. So if we're going to be talking about all these variables within a family, we first have to define what a family is, which is hard because it's different things to different people. In other words, family is a construct. The U.S. Census defines a family as two or more people who are related by marriage, birth, or adoption, and who live together. The problem, though, is that this leaves out a lot of people. What about foster families, or parents who are not married? And until 2015, gay couples raising children would not fall within this definition. Therefore, the book defines family from the child's perspective. To a child, a family is at least one adult who is related to the child by birth, marriage, adoption, or foster status. And these adults are responsible for providing basic necessities, as well as love, support, safety, stability, and opportunities for learning. Part of the family is the family structure, which is the number of and relationships among the people in a household. So how many people are there and how do they know each other? The family structure in the US has been gradually changing over time. More children today are living in single or unmarried households. And most of the concerns with being a single parent come from financial problems, where 34% of children living with single parents are below the poverty line, as opposed to 8% with two parents. There just isn't as much income coming in. There is also concern with how much time a single parent can spend with their child if they are working to be able to survive. This can be a really serious hardship for some parents. First-time parents are also older now than they were in the past. Part of this is delaying children due to education, and part is due to teen pregnancies decreasing. As an instructor and a young mother myself, there is no judgment in when people decide to have children. However, the book does list out advantages for people who do decide to have children later. Older parents tend to have more education, higher status occupations, higher incomes. They tend to have births that are planned. If they are married, they are less likely to get divorced within 10 years. And they tend to be more positive or less harsh with their parenting. Looking more at family structures, more children today are living with grandparents than in the past. Grandparents can be awesome, but there are some considerations that go along with this family structure. These families tend to be lower SES, and they might have the additional stress of raising a child on a fixed retirement income. There can also be difficulty with maintaining a social support network. Part of this might be that their current friends do not relate to their situation, or other parents with children of the same age are in a different generation, and it can be difficult to relate and build friendships, or even just keep up with changing parenting norms. And these children tend to experience a range of emotional and behavioral problems, which is sometimes due to them having previous separations from their parents. Families are also smaller today than they were in the past. Again, this is likely due to having children later on. When people start having children later, there is less time to build families due to biological considerations like menopause. Also, family structures tend to be more fluid today. About 50% of marriages end in divorce, which leads to 1/5 of children experiencing a change in family structure due to parents separating, divorce, remarriage, cohabitation, or even parental death. And lastly, with family structure is same-sex parents. In 2016, 114,000 gay or lesbian couples reported raising children together. Most of these children are biologically related to one of their parents, either from a previous relationship, a sperm donor, or a surrogate. There are couples that adopt as well, but it can be really difficult to do so. The most common question about these families is whether same-sex couples can be good parents, whatever good means here. There is strong evidence from a variety of studies that show children of gay or lesbian parents are not different than children from straight parents in terms of mental health, behavior, and academic achievement. Children can get what they need in either situation. The second question that comes up is if having gay parents will make children gay. Research says no. Again, a series of studies have shown that there is no difference with sexual orientation, gender identity, gender type behavior, which is whether a child acts masculine or feminine, or sexual behavior in adolescence. So having gay parents won't make someone gay, and having straight parents won't make someone straight. What actually matters here are the family dynamics and how well everyone treats each other. Moving into divorced parents, the U.S. Census reports that 4.6 million children of divorced parents in the U.S. live with their mother, while 1.3 million live with their father. To make the divorce situation worse, 40% of remarriages involving children end in another divorce within 10 years. Divorce can cause distress in children. When parents are newly divorced, they are often hurt and stressed, and therefore treat their children with more irritability, coercion, less warmth, less emotional availability, less consistency, and less overall supervision. On top of the child trying to adapt to a new family structure and deal with being parented in this way, they might also have to transition to a new neighborhood and home, which may cause them to change schools and peer groups, which causes extra stress because that was their form of consistency and support. These high levels of stress can lead to negative outcomes like sadness or even internalizing disorders like depression. They may then have externalizing disorders where children are angry and aggressive. They might have lower self-esteem and less social responsibility or competency. There are protective factors that help children when a divorce is happening. One of the big ones is warmth and emotional availability from parents. I know that that's sometimes the most difficult given how stressed the parents are, but children also need support during this time. It's also important not to let children feel like they are getting caught in the middle, whether that be having to inform one parent about the other's activities, hiding information from one parent, or feeling the need to express loyalty to a parent. In addition to this, it tends to be harmful when a parent inappropriately discloses sensitive information about the divorce or each other. However, even though divorce is hard, sometimes it's in the best interest of the individuals involved. There is this idea that people should try to stay together for the sake of the kids. But research shows that when there is high conflict within the family, children whose parents are separated are better adjusted than those whose parents stayed together. On a slightly brighter side, while divorce is still difficult, we do see that overall, children whose parents divorce do not suffer significant enduring problems. So overall, children will be okay. When parents do separate, step-parents may eventually enter the child's life. More than 4 million children do live in households with step-parents in the US. And there's two types of step-family households. There are simple households, where the step-parent joins a family not having any of their own children. And then there are complex or blended step-families, where a step-parent joins a family with their own child or children. And like most situations, there are positives and negatives. On the negative side, if a child is now used to spending time with their custodial parent, meaning the parent that has custody over them, a new person coming in might decrease the time they spend together. Step-parents may also have difficulty with their stepchildren. There can be more fighting, and in the case of a stepmother coming in, there might be this expectation that she needs to actively care for this child, and the child might resist this. Also, parents and step-parents might fight. Like we talked about on the last slide, it's often better for parents who are seriously fighting to split, as opposed to keeping the child in that stressful situation. However, there can also be positives to having step-parents. It might help with income, as so many children of single parents are living below the poverty line. And yes, while they might get nicer gifts for holidays, this might also mean that food can be put on the table, or they can move into a better home. In addition to income, having a step-parent might also give the child another trusted adult in their life. They might have some really great experiences with them and have another person that shows them warmth and consistency. And whether or not having a step-parent is good or bad, again depends on family dynamics. How well do parents treat each other, and how well do they treat the children? So we've talked a bit about family dynamics, but we haven't really defined it yet. Family dynamics are the way in which family members interact through various relationships, whether that be parent to parents or parent to child. And part of parenting here is socialization, which is the process through which children acquire the values, standards, skills, knowledge, and behaviors that are appropriate for their culture. Looking closer at parenting and focusing on discipline, discipline is the set of strategies and behaviors parents use to teach children how to behave appropriately. And discipline is most effective when it is internalized, meaning the child has learned and accepted the reasons for the desired behavior. This might be done through other-oriented induction, which is focusing on how one's behavior affects others. For example, you might emphasize that being hit hurts the other child's body and their feelings, so you are explaining why you shouldn't do something, as opposed to just telling them to stop. When there is too little other-oriented induction, the child will discount their parent's message and just continue the behavior. But when there is too much, children might comply because they feel as if they are being forced to do so. In other words, their compliance is external, coming from the parents, as opposed to internal, where they are doing it because that's what they think is right. And just as a reminder from previous lectures, reinforcement does work better than punishment. Punishment is needed, but it is more effective to reinforce behavior you want to see. So what about spanking as discipline? I know that this is a controversial topic, but the research shows that spanking does not improve children's behavior in the short or long term. Instead, it seems to increase children's risk for a range of negative outcomes, including mental health problems, parent-child relationship problems, low self-esteem, lower cognitive ability, and many cases of physical abuse start with spanking before getting more violent because parents are not seeing that behavior change they're wanting. Spanking is also linked with negative outcomes equally across cultural groups. I know that some cultures promote spanking more than others, but we are seeing negative outcomes regardless. Therefore, a number of associations have come out to make anti-spanking statements, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychological Association, the Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the American Professional Society of the Abuse of Children, and the National Association of Pediatric Nurse Practitioners. Parenting styles can also affect children's development. Parenting styles are defined as behaviors and attitudes that set the emotional climate of parent-child interactions. These styles are typically defined in terms of how demanding the parent is, but also how supportive and responsive they are to the child. For example, authoritative parents are high in both demandingness and supportiveness. These parents set clear standards and limits and are firm about enforcing them, but they allow children to have autonomy within those limits. These parents are attentive and responsive to their children's concerns and needs, and they respect and consider their children's perspective. There are also authoritarian parents. These parents are high in demandingness and low in responsiveness. These parents are non-responsive to their child's needs. They enforce their demands through exercise of parental power, whether that be through threats, punishments, or even psychological control. And they are oriented towards obedience and authority, expecting children to comply with their demands without question or explanation. So while authoritative parents might explain to a child why we don't do something, authoritarian parents will say, "No, do it because I said so." There are also permissive parents who are high in responsiveness but low in demandingness. These parents are responsive to their child's needs, but they do not require them to regulate themselves or behave appropriately. And therefore, these children tend to be impulsive, they are low in self-regulation, high in externalizing problems, and low in school achievement. Then there are uninvolved parents. These parents are low in both demandingness and responsiveness. They are generally disengaged. They do not set limits or monitor their child's behavior. They are not supportive of their children, and their children tend to have disturbed attachment relationships and problems with peers as a result. Current research is moving away from having a single parenting style. Instead, it seems like parenting is dependent on the context of the situation. For example, if you are running late to something and need to move quickly, or a child is doing something that is dangerous, you might not have the time to be an authoritarian parent and have a conversation about their behavior. Or using this picture of parenting styles, maybe when a child has a friend over at their house, their parent might be authoritarian about sharing and say that they should share because it's important to take turns. But when their child brings a special toy with them to the park, they might be more permissive and say share if you want to because there is less of an obligation in that situation. The way children behave also elicits different parenting styles, and the degree to which a child expresses emotions like anger, self-regulation, or disobedience might be based on a couple of different things. The first being genetics. And like we talked about in past chapters, there is a differential susceptibility, where children might become more sensitive or more predisposed than others, and the environment might elicit more of a response based on that. There is also bidirectionality, where parents and children are mutually affected by one another's behavior. So, for example, spanking at age 1 predicts greater aggression at age 3. Which in turn predicts more spanking at age 5. Also, parents' hostile and inconsistent behaviors towards their adolescents is typically rewarded with the same behaviors from their children. So it kind of creates this cycle. The book highlights differences between mothers and fathers. Fathers are becoming more engaged with their children than in the past, but mothers still spend more time with the kids. Mothers tend to provide more physical care and emotional support, while fathers tend to spend more time playing. And these gender differences seem to come from cultural practices and what is expected within our society. But it also depends on the amount of time spent at home with the child. Regardless, a meta-analysis, which is a study that combines all known studies on a topic, found that both mothers and fathers' acceptance and warmth towards their children is linked with children's positive psychological adjustment regardless of country. So that emotional availability is really, really important. Moving into siblings. Siblings act as playmates, but also sources of support, instruction, security, assistance, and caregiving. Older siblings tend to take on more of a parental role with younger siblings and can affect their behaviors. For example, if an older sibling engages in more prosocial behavior, the younger sibling will engage in similar behaviors years later. But siblings can also be a source of conflict. Part of this might come from proximity and competition for resources, such as toys or the parent's time. However, siblings' relationships tend to be less hostile and more supportive when their parents are warm and accepting of them. Conflict also arises when parents pick favorites. To focus more on child favoritism, feeling less favored by a parent can lead to distress, depression, and other adjustment problems. And this tends to be worse in younger to middle childhood than in adolescence, when children can try to justify the behavior and say, well, maybe I don't spend as much time at home with our parents as you do, and that might be why you're being treated like you are the favorite. Cultural values can also change evaluations of favoritism. For example, in Mexican American families, one study showed that older children who embrace the cultural value of familism, where there is an emphasis on interdependence, mutual support, and loyalty, were not at a higher risk of depressive symptoms or risky behavior from that differential family treatment. So, under what conditions do siblings get along? Well, we see that there is more harmony when parents get along with each other. In fact, siblings whose parents fight are likely to have more hostile interactions due to things like modeling and observational learning. Siblings also get along when their parents are not divorced and their siblings are biological. Step and half siblings tend to fight more. And again, culture. Siblings fight less when they are part of a collectivistic society as opposed to an individualistic society. Moving into child maltreatment. Child maltreatment is an action or failure to act on the part of a parent or caretaker that either results in physical or emotional harm to a child or puts the child at risk of serious harm. And there are 4 types of maltreatment. There is neglect, which is the failure of a caregiver to provide necessary food, water, shelter, clothing, medical care, or supervision, such that the child's health and safety are harmed or threatened. There is physical abuse, which is any behavior that results in non-accidental physical injury of a child. There is emotional abuse, which involves a pattern of behavior in which a caregiver demeans, rejects, repeatedly criticizes, or withholds love from a child, or otherwise communicates to the child that they are worthless, unloved, or unwanted. And lastly, there is sexual abuse, which refers to sexual acts or sexual exploitation involving children, including both inappropriate touching of a child and exposure to sexual content such as pornography. When there is a co-occurrence of multiple forms of maltreatment, that is called polyvictimization. And there are several risks for maltreatment, such as parents' lack of knowledge about their children's needs and abilities, a strong negative reaction to stress, parental alcohol and substance use, parents that are in abusive relationships themselves. We do consider domestic violence to be a form of maltreatment, given how stressful that is on the child. And parents with a history of being maltreated themselves. Parents who have suffered maltreatment tend to maltreat their children as well. The book lists a few ways in which we can prevent child maltreatment. The first is strengthening the economic situation of families. Being low income is a huge stressor, And we see higher rates of maltreatment in low SES families, given that they can't always afford basic needs. We should also change social norms to promote more positive parenting. Spanking is still prevalent, and there's not much being talked about in terms of how we can parent instead. So going along with this is enhancing parenting skills. Offering classes and resources is important for parents, especially at the community level. Also, we should provide early education to children, which not only gives them a safe place to be and often provides food, it can help with self-efficacy and help children stay on track for school. For those of us in Idaho, the Idaho Association for the Education of Young Children is a great resource for parents both in terms of positive parenting and finding quality childcare. And lastly, it's important to intervene when maltreatment happens. In Idaho, there is a number to call to help children and prevent future occurrences. I will post these resources on Moodle as well. Moving into Chapter 13 on peer development. Peers are defined as people of the same age and status who are unrelated to one another. And as children, the main thing peers do is play. Play refers to voluntary activities, particularly those of children with no specific motivation beyond their inherent enjoyment. And play can be alone or with others. And a lot of the time, we just think of play as something kids do, but it's actually really important for them. It allows children to interact with peers and experience happiness. It aids social emotional development, such as with cooperation, turn-taking, and trying out social roles. It helps children to learn and practice empathy and concern for others. It aids cognitive development, such as with problem solving, memory, and creativity. It helps with language development, and even physical development, such as with motor skills, coordination, balance, and strength. There are also different types of play, which can be both social or non-social. Starting with non-social play, there is unoccupied play, where the child watches things in the environment, but only briefly. There is onlooker play, where the child watches other children play, not necessarily because they want to play with them and join the group, but because they're enjoying watching them. There is solitary play, where the child is engrossed in their own activity and does not attend to the behaviors of others. So maybe they're playing with dolls or action figures by themselves. Looking at social play, there is parallel play, where children are playing similarly next to each other. So maybe they're both drawing a picture together, but they're not really interacting and they're drawing different things. There is associative play, where the child plays with other children in a common activity, but there is no coordination and different goals. So maybe children are interacting and playing blocks together, but they are building different things. And lastly, there is cooperative play, which is organized play with a common goal. So maybe these kids are playing some sort of imaginary game together, or maybe even a board game. Friends are slightly different than peers. A friend is a person with whom an individual has an intimate, reciprocated positive relationship, making them slightly closer than peers. And when choosing friends, people usually choose people who like the same things and behave similarly to them. And locations where friends are made is dependent on age. When kids are younger, they tend to have friends closer in proximity to them. So school and whatever playgroups their parents put them in. They tend to have less say about where they can go and make friends with those available to them. School is the most popular place to hang out with friends, even as children get older, with a friend's house coming in close second. And in the age of technology, as children grow up, they start making more friends on the internet, which we'll talk more about on the next slide. Further, there are some gender differences. where when children are younger, they tend to have a preference for same-gender friends, but as they age, they tend to have more diverse friend groups. Culture can also influence friendships. For example, in Okinawa, Japan, children tend to be free to roam in public with their peers. There is a lot of freedom and time spent with friends. And this is vastly different from children in Kenya, who tend to be confined to their family yard. They don't get as much time with friends, but they get a lot of time spent with siblings and other family members. And again, we see that the greater importance that is placed on traditional family values, such as family obligation, children's obedience, and orientation towards the family, the less peer acceptance is related to adolescents' life satisfaction. And just like we see with siblings, friends fight. Looking at aggression in children in China, Italy, and Japan, there is a greater level of reported relational aggression where someone might gossip and say something mean about them or spread rumors, while children in Jordan and Kenya report more physical aggression. However, this varies by gender too, with boys tending to be more physically aggressive than girls. Friendships do change over time. Around a year, year and a half, we do see the beginnings of friendships, where children show preferences for certain children by touching them, smiling at them, and having more positive interactions together than with other peers. Around 24 months, children will imitate social behaviors, cooperative problem solving, and trading roles during play. Around 3 to 4, children can make and maintain at least one friend, can identify their best friend, and prefer same-gender peers. After the age of 5, children can communicate and cooperate more with friends than non-friends, and start to negotiate their way out of conflict. Around 6 to 8, children will define friendships on activities and amount of time spent together, as opposed to just being around someone. There starts to be an evaluation of the quality of the friendship. At 9, children become more sensitive to the needs of others and inequalities. They can start to see when their friends and others are not being treated fairly. And in adolescence, there is more of a focus on intimacy and self-disclosure, and friendships start to become more exclusive. Looking at the role of technology in friendships, there's actually a few ways that technology can be really helpful. For example, there's greater anonymity, which reduces social inhibition. There is less emphasis on physical appearance. You don't have to get all dressed up or even worry about how others are going to perceive how you're dressed to be able to interact with them online. There is more control over social interactions, where you can stop and think about what you want to reply before you say it. You can also find peers that are very similar to you, and there's also 24/7 access. So say all of your friends are asleep around you, your online friends might still be awake. And there's a couple of hypotheses about how the internet might impact social development. The first being the rich get richer hypothesis, where youths with good social skills may benefit from the internet when it comes to making good friends. So those who are already good with social skills and interacting with people just get more of that, and it builds those skills even more. Then there is the social compensation hypothesis, where the internet may be especially beneficial for lonely, depressed, and socially anxious adolescents. So instead of already being good, this is a way of building skills and building that community if you don't have it. Supportive friendships are really important. We do see that children with best friends and intimate, supportive friends report less loneliness than those without, and chronic or long-term friendlessness is associated with depressive symptoms and social withdrawal. Supportive friends are also important for periods of transition. For example, children have more positive attitudes towards school if they start with a large number of friends. And friends can help buffer against unpleasant experiences. For example, children who report negative experiences have lower cortisol levels when they have a best friend present. Friendships also help with social and cognitive skills. For example, friendships teach social skills and how to form positive relationships. We see that positive behaviors such as cooperation and negotiation are more common among friends than non-friends. And friends who talk about emotions have greater social emotional skills than friends who are less close. And gossip, while not always great, teaches about social norms. And openness in friend groups promotes cognitive skills and enhances performance on creative tasks. For example, in one study, children were asked to write about rainforests and were either placed in a group with friends or with non-friends. And the group with friends had more constructive conversations, more on-task behavior, and had higher quality writing than non-friends, which shows that it's not just interpersonal skills that students gain, but cognitive skills as well. Unfortunately, not all peer and friendship interactions are positive. Aggression and disruptiveness can really come out if a child has a negative friend group. We see that when a child has friends who have behavioral problems, there is a greater likelihood of negative behaviors such as drug use or violence. And it might be that these friend groups peer pressure the child, but we also see that aggressive and disruptive children choose peers similar to themselves, which actively creates their negative friend group. It's not always a passive process. Once in the friend group, friends will engage in deviancy training, where negative behavior is modeled and reinforced and is then seen as normal. There are factors that increase the likelihood of negative peer influence, such as cold and detached parenting, high general susceptibility, again, being around others with negative behaviors such as drug use, and the friend promoting this behavior having a high status within the peer group. Also part of negative peer interactions is bullying and victimization. Bullying results from a power imbalance, where the bully, typically a peer, is perceived to have power over the victim, whether that be popularity, they're physically stronger, they're richer, what have you. Girls are more likely than boys to be bullied, and bullying peaks in middle school, but then declines through high school. But why do some children bully? Some do it to try to seem powerful and to gain power or status. There might also be some individual, home, neighborhood, or societal factors. So if you think about the bioecological model, the child might be having a difficult home life, or their parents might be gone a lot, or maybe they are being bullied themselves in a different environment. And along with this, bullies tend to be callous, antisocial, susceptible to peer pressure, higher in social status, and have harsh or insensitive parents. Victims of bullying tend to be children who are rejected by peers, depressed, and who do poorly in school. So essentially, the children who are already struggling are the ones that are getting picked on. There also seems to be some heredity factors associated with aggression, where those with genes that predispose them to aggression lead them to also be victims. For example, children with little self-regulation tend to be both aggressive and victims of bullying. In addition to this, some children, less than 20%, may be both victims and perpetrators of bullying, so there is some overlap there. And a lot of the time when we think about bullying, we think about physical bullying, but there's also relational aggression or social bullying, which consists of things like excluding others from the group, withholding friendship to inflict harm, or spreading rumors to ruin a peer's reputation. And this type of bullying is specifically aimed at damaging a victim's peer relationships and is most common among high school girls. There is also cyberbullying, which refers to repeated and intentional harassment or mistreatment of an individual via digital devices. About 15% of high school students report being cyberbullied, and 12% report cyberbullying. And just like with other forms of bullying, there is some overlap, where cyber victims tend to also be cyber perpetrators. And with this, most cyberbullying consists of mean or hurtful comments or spreading rumors about someone. And rates of cyberbullying is again higher for girls, as well as LGBT plus youth, and early high school students. Cyberbullying tends to be the highest in ninth grade and then declines. And like before, victims tend to be high in social anxiety, psychological distress, have depressive symptoms, aggressive tendencies, poor anger management, and have problems in school. Going back into friendships, the book highlights differences between boys and girls, where compared to boys, girls tend to desire closeness and dependency. They tend to worry about repercussions of expressing anger. They are more likely to rely on friends for advice or for homework help. They tend to get more upset when a friend betrays them or does not provide support. They tend to report more friendship-related stress, but we do see that they have just as stable of peer relationships as boys do. Again, there's the idea of co-rumination with girls, where they are ruminating or thinking about everything negative without trying to make it better, but to another person. And we do see that girls do not differ from boys in the amount of best friend conflict they have. Moving into our last section, there is sociometric status, which is a measurement that reflects the degree to which children are liked or disliked by their peers. Children can be popular, rejected, neglected, or controversial. Popular children are liked by many and disliked by few. They are described as being skilled at interacting with peers and keeping positive relationships. They are viewed by peers and adults as being cooperative, friendly, sociable, helpful, and sensitive to others. They tend to be able to regulate their emotions and their behaviors more than other children. And they tend to have other attributes such as prestige, athletic ability, physical attractiveness, or wealth. But they do tend to use aggression, whether it be relational or physical, to help them obtain their goals. Rejected children are the opposite, where they are liked by few and disliked by many. They are likely to have different motives than popular peers. For example, they are more likely to try to get even with another child or to show them up. And they struggle with finding solutions to difficult social situations. For example, when asked what they would do if they were wanting a turn on a swing, rejected children came up with fewer strategies than non-rejected children. And the strategies they did come up with were hostile, demanding, and threatening, which makes sense because these children also struggle to understand others' feelings or behaviors. There are two subtypes of rejected children. There are aggressive rejected children who are prone to aggression, disruptive behavior, delinquency, and overall negative behavior such as hostility or threatening others. And while this is not great for the children around them, these children also struggle heavily with school. And it's not clear if peer rejection causes problems in school or if the maladaptive behavior causes problems in multiple areas of the child's life. Then there is withdrawn rejected children, and these children are socially withdrawn, wary, and often timid. These children tend to be frequently victimized by their peers, and this increases alienation over time, where they are just constantly being punished for trying to socially interact to the point that they just take themselves out of social interactions completely. There are interventions to try to help rejected children, one being the promoting alternative thinking strategies or PATHS intervention, which helps children to identify emotional expressions and to think about causes and consequences of different emotional expressions. And it promotes self-control through self-talk and self-regulation. And it's been shown to improve emotional knowledge, self-regulation, pro-social behavior, and social competence. And some studies have even shown that it reduces aggression and social withdrawal as well. The next sociometric status is neglected. These children are infrequently mentioned as liked or disliked by peers. They're just simply not noticed as much. They tend to be less sociable and also less disruptive, so less attention is on them. They back away from interactions that involve aggression. They report feeling less supported by peers, but not typically anxious about social interactions. And they're actually rated as socially competent by peers. So again, they're not struggling with anything, they're just not as noticed. Lastly, there are controversial children who are both liked and disliked by quite a few peers. These children have the characteristics of both popular and rejected children. For example, they might be aggressive and disruptive, but then also cooperative and social. And they tend to be described as socially active group leaders. I like to think of these children as the class clowns, where they can be loud and somewhat obnoxious sometimes to the point that some children don't like them, but they can be really charming and make great friends at the same time. We do see similar findings cross-culturally with sociometric status, where well-liked children are pro-social and have leadership skills, and rejected children tend to be aggressive and do poorly in school. But cultural norms can influence sociometric status as well. For example, we see that Chinese children who are shy, sensitive, and cautious tend to be viewed as competent and leaders by their teachers. And this is likely because being withdrawn and having self-effacing behavior is valued within collectivistic societies. We also see an association between attachment and peer relationships. Looking at secure attachment, we see that securely attached children develop positive social expectations. And part of this might be because secure attachments show children how to reciprocate in relationships, as well as how to self-regulate, have confidence, be enthusiastic, and friendly. Looking at insecure attachments, children with these insecure attachments tend to have difficulty with regulating these emotions. They might have hostile and negative behaviors modeled for them, and they might withdraw from social situations to avoid punishment. And looking at the research on this, there is evidence that supports these relationships in this way through preschool, early, and mid-elementary school. But after this, with high school and adult years, this association is not nearly as strong. Parents have a huge role in shaping social situations for their children, and they do this in two ways. The first being monitoring. In early years, parents decide who their children interact with and how often. Children at this age can't just get in the car and go over to a friend's house. They are having interactions through daycare or preschool if their parents choose to put them in there, or having friend play dates or hanging out at the park. And we do see that the more interaction a child has, the more positive and social they tend to be. And monitoring is important even into adolescence because we see that when parents know who their child is with, who their best friends are, and who their families are, is associated with things like less drinking, marijuana use, and delinquency. Parents also do this through coaching, where they are giving suggestions on how to interact with others. For example, how to enter a group and when to not disrupt people, as well as emotional coaching. And coaching is associated with an increase in social skills and acceptance from peers. Just some final notes on parenting. Again, that component of coaching is so important because we see that warm parenting is linked to things like self-regulation and peer acceptance, while harsh parenting promotes more negative behavior and peer rejection. However, this association is bidirectional. It is a lot easier to show warmth and kindness to someone that is showing it to you in return. And if a child or parent is having a difficult time doing that, this is going to be really difficult on both ends. Also, it's important to note that social support changes over childhood. While monitoring is still important into adolescence, Support from parents is the lowest during teen years, especially from 16 to 18. During this time, support comes from friends. And like we talked about in other chapters, the influence of the family does start to decline with age, and more influence starts to come from the environment. And that is all I have for you. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.